Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. As we approach the holiday season, home fires become a huge concern. My guest tonight is Paul K. Whitney, who is an authority on fire prevention and home restoration after a fire. Paul is also the author of The Household Fire, The Challenges and Answers. Paul, welcome to Lynchburg Live.
Thank you for having me and having the opportunity to discuss these important issues.
You know, as we get started, just let me ask you a few questions about yourself. Are you a Lynchburg native?
I've been in Lynchburg for 40 years.
That's kind of native.
Very native. And I was born in Kentucky and moved to Mississippi for 4 years, and then Alabama, and then to Lynchburg.
So you started a business as a building contractor after college, is that right?
Worked in the construction industry and was hired by a group out of Roanoke as a disaster restoration project manager for a construction company out of Roanoke, and later on moved to a Class A contractor in Lynchburg called Whitney Construction.
So home restoration was not your first?
No, it was new home and remodeling and typical construction for a young general contractor.
So what's the name of your business?
Well, at the time it's Whitney Construction. We moved on to research and inventions and risk reduction technologies.
Are you still based in Lynchburg? And is it still Whitney Construction?
One of the companies is in Lynchburg, one of the companies is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and there's some other endeavors being developed that are out of state.
When did you become interested in home restoration? I mean, I think, you know, we all hear about these disasters and see what people are going through when they're interviewed on television, but none of us really know what happens after that point.
Well, early on it was a business endeavor, and having a construction background, became very aware of the magnitude of these disasters, and then started looking into the technical aspects of how to restore a home and how to work with insurance companies, and found out quickly that people are under a lot of stress and you have to help them go through the process, and raising the information bar is part of that process. So it became trying to help folks under these stressful environments is what's driving what I'm doing.
So the major focus now is?
Research, technology development, and education.
Now, you know, when we think about fire restoration, I mean, you see burned out places like the one behind us that we're using as a background. Yeah. But I don't think people I don't think they think into water damage that has to be taken care of, and you mentioned mold to me.
Well, fire departments are under enormous stress these days. They're trying to bring all the equipment and get the men safely to the job, and people and the women that support fire activities, and then hopefully they're going to have access to water. They may have to bring it, they may have to bring it through a fire hose, but water is usually the typical extinguishment tool. And the fire departments are going to have to use, in some cases, a lot of it, depending on what the size of the fires are going to be. And if you start introducing water and you have an enormous amount of contaminants released during a fire anyhow, and you're washing all of this mix into the structure, and over time, if you don't take care of it properly, you're going to end up developing mold, and mold may develop into bacteria. Bacteria can cause a whole family of problems, and if you're doing fire restoration, you have to take care of water while you're taking care of the fire damage, and it has to go hand in hand. There's enormous exposure out there for mold issues, and it's become more prevalent in the last 20 years because there's some attention been given because of some claims that were made against certain entities concerning mold and bacteria relative to a disaster restoration.
All right, you told me that you had literally mastered techniques for restoration that leave no smoke odor at all.
Well, after you get into this process, you start discovering there's a technical background that you have to develop very quickly, and there's schools and there's laboratories that study these environments because they're so widespread. There are over 1,000 fires a day in this country, and that's the ones we can count. This is an enormous research area, and an area to eliminate odors, of course, is one of the most important parts, because if you're eliminating odors, you're eliminating source material. You have to be aggressive. You have to go to the schools. You have to identify the right chemical applications. You have to know about proper demolition. Demolition is an art. It's not just a bunch of guys tearing things up. And you have to take it to a certain level, because insurance companies are going to try to tell you how to do most of this work. And you have to be very patient, but you have to also
I can imagine.
Have to stand by and say you have to take this to a completion, and you want to make sure that nobody's interfering with your technical expertise. And demolition, we use sandblasting, we use the proper chemicals. You can either take it out or you can encapsulate it. And those are the major techniques.
And you do, I mean, not only do you have smoke odors, but I imagine from the mildew and the mold, you get those odors too.
There are so many contaminants released in a household fire. The short list can be over 100.
Oh my goodness.
And these particles are in gas form during a fire condition. And they are released as solids and liquids suspended in a gas. And they settle inside the home. And under pressure and expansion and heat, they will penetrate into areas that until you take it apart, you don't really get a good handle on where it is.
Right.
So there's a lot of hard work in doing it right.
Now, you told me about a product, Flow to Stop.
Yes.
Would you tell me about that? I think that's fascinating.
After
And you've also brought this. Can I just
yes,
hold this up and show? This is what we'll be talking about.
This device was developed out of the experience of going through so many fires and watching smoke circulated through homes under these high pressure conditions. And then we have, on average, in a household in America today, a 1,200 cubic foot per minute fan, which is your air conditioning system or HVAC or furnace. And what's happening during an expanding fire is you're now circulating these components through the system. And there's a large discussion about how much contamination, how much of this is combustion air. At any rate, I think we should just turn the systems off. And with this device, there's patents, protection for this, and we can actually install this, or the heating and cooling company or security company can install this in your thermostat area, and it'll actually interact with your thermostat, your smoke detectors, or carbon monoxide detector. It picks up different environmental conditions, and it's what's called in the business an intelligent device. It thinks a little bit.
And you invented this?
With the help of a design team, I'm very fortunate to be in the group that I'm in. But yes, it helps, and it can even notify, and we can address your thermostat and give first responders hopefully a jump on the fire condition and allow less damage to the insurers for their exposure.
You know, it's hard to believe that something this small could do all that. I think that's fascinating, and that you came up with the idea to do it. The
tendency is to even make it smaller, and but you'd have to be able to function with these technologies, and so many technologies are so advanced. We're trying to keep the discussion simple so it's more flexible in the marketplace.
You had given us some statistics a moment ago about fires generally that take place, what, a year or something, but I was wanting to ask you about fires that are related to cooking and to stoves. What kind of statistics do you see on that?
If you study, there's a lot of data, and if you study it and try to make it simple, you'll learn that about 29% of total fires in the country are kitchen fires, which is a human behavior fire. And the typical problem is that we'll turn on whatever we're cooking, get distracted. It may be mom trying to break up the kids, or it may be a phone
Facebook.
call, it may be Facebook, there may be all these distractions, but the bottom line is you walked away from the #1 fire in America.
Right.
And that's devastating because of the emotional stress that you immediately put on everyone when it could so easily be avoided. And it's devastating because it's also the #1 injury fire in the country. Smoking being the #1 fatality fire.
You know, you had told me that as we approach the holidays that there are so many fire hazards, not just with cooking, but cooking in particular. But can you tell us some other fire hazards?
Well, let's go back to the basics again. House construction nowadays, if it's your 2,000 square foot house, is an average house, and of course we can go smaller or larger, but those houses that are being built today have close to a mile of wire in them. It's over 5,000 feet. Then we go pull out the ornaments and we start connecting all these things to them, and we create another load on our electrical system. And Americans hoard a lot of old stuff that probably should be thrown out, and we all have that same tendency. Please inspect these light loads. It's an amazing event to watch a family that's going through the holidays end up having to go through a fire, and it could be so easily avoided. Get rid of the old ornaments. If things are smelling funny, or what I've phrased is if they're winking or they're blinking or they're stinking, you need to get rid of them. They're doing those things for reasons. Usually it's resistance.
And that's a good way to remember it.
If they're doing those activities, and especially your nose, when that smells funny somewhere, go find it.
Something's not right.
It can be something as a Christmas light. It can be an ornament. It could be an appliance that's overloaded one last time. And when these appliances start acting and behaving oddly, unplug them. A toaster oven's $29.95.
Right.
When I show up, everything has changed.
Now there was something that you and I talked about on the phone. I told you every year at Thanksgiving or Christmas you hear about someone who's really not bright who takes those huge deep fryer things that are meant to be in your yard and brings them into the kitchen and attempts to deep fry a turkey. And so many house fires I've heard of that start that way.
Deep fried turkey is very tasty. It's not worth putting your whole house at risk.
No.
We're talking about cooking with 2 to 3 gallons of cooking oil, usually peanut oil. The people who create biodiesel use it for a base element to create fuel. And when we take a open flame propane burner and put that much fuel, and you're not outside with a fire extinguisher close by, I can't put that together in my mind.
No, to me either.
It is one of those things that we have, I think, as a society, been desensitized to a lot of these bad behaviors, and we'll watch people practice those on a TV monitor, and it's very upsetting. These 2nd and 3rd degree burn units can tell you a lot more than I can.
Oh, I'm sure. Now, you said, what is the most difficult part of a restoration from a kitchen fire?
Well, construction-wise, if it's a true kitchen fire and it's confined to one end of the house, structurally, it's not that big of a challenge. The finishes are something you can order, and floor covering, the house will generally be smoked. And if that's confined to the kitchen, it's manageable. But if it gets away, it can easily escalate and take the whole house, and it can take people with it. And the cooking fires that happen late in the evening or early in the morning when something's been left on and somebody's become sleepy, the sleep medications are very popular these days. We're creating these environments when we have to turn these stoves and cooktops off. The emotional pieces that come with it for the family members is if they're not injured and everybody's alive, they've got to deal with an immediate mix-up in their entire life. They're going to have to go from their everyday stressful patterns and going through getting the kids to school or getting them to practice or soccer, and then they've got this huge event right in the middle of what they're doing, and it disrupts their entire life. and you
I'm
have to
sure.
relocate. So relocating is stressful. If we had to move without a fire, it's stressful. If we had to go through a remodeling project without a fire, it would
is
be
stressful.
stressful.
Yes.
If we had to think about inventory our contents, that would be stressful. Those are emotional ties to our past. And if you combine all three of those, and then you figure out that you're the cause of it, you have to try to stand people back up so they can function again.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that is a challenge. Some people, after these events, and stress, middle-income families in America are under an enormous amount of stress. Low-income families are a lot of stress. And these events and the first responders who are trying to get to these folks to save their lives or try to reduce the property damage, they're under a lot of stress. And the heroes that put themselves in traffic and try to get to you because you can't operate a cooktop.
Do you find that most people have adequate insurance?
It depends on how they've looked at their insurance, reviewed it, and learned. One of the reasons for the section in the book about insurance is this is a practical, experience-based reference. And if you don't check off some of these items, you just don't know. And contractors cannot come in and fill in the blanks. You have to do this ahead of time. You can't rewrite coverage after a loss. And we need to develop better skills, better understanding, practical, real-time proposals with our insurance company. Discuss these things with your agent. They need to know. And if you're going to get adequate coverage, you're going to have to communicate and be effective. The information, the checklist in this book is very plain. It's not complicated. You just got to go through it. One of the things we emphasize, know your structure limits, not what it costs to buy your house, what I can build it. Know what your exclusions are. Those are the things that they're not going to pay that you may assume that are covered. And know your endorsements. Those are additional coverages. You may need them to live away from home or buy more contents or try to rebuild your house above the limits. Contractors are not going to want to work with people that don't have the coverage. They don't have the ability to invest in your project.
So your best advice really is when that renewal, your hazard insurance comes up for renewal, don't just casually write the check and send it off. You should be aware of what the coverage is and if your coverage is up to date with what's going on today.
There's so much information in what you just said. You may find out for $75 more, $100 more a year for your coverage in your home, you could have had everything put back together on time. It may be that little amount of money gets you the coverage you need. I encourage people to get higher deductibles. Don't turn in small claims. You don't want to be on insurance industry radar. If it's not something sizable above $3,000 or $4,000, take care of it out of pocket. You got to make sure that you're listening to your agent. They're not just trying to make a premium bump. You've got to make sure you're an educated customer.
We just renewed our hazard insurance, and I went through those questions with this guy.
Yeah.
And I think it certainly helped me know what to do and how to approach.
How did he respond?
He responded with exactly what you just said about if it's a small claim, take care of it yourself and adjust your policy so that your deductible is not is inadequate. You don't want to have your deductible paying out $100 for this or $1,000 for that. Make it something that's worthwhile so that if something big comes up, you're
Insurance
covered.
is not what it was 5 years ago, and contractors are under an enormous amount of stress to try to perform. And there's a lot of people getting out of the restoration business. It's a very stressful environment.
Time is going by very fast, and I want to hit on your book. I want you to tell me about the book. Right here it is, and the name of it is?
The Household Fire, the Challenges and Answers is the subtitle. We put it together in 2003, and luckily we were able to get FEMA to respond. It's on the Learning Resource Center book list. And the private sector contractors is going to do the bulk of the restoration work in this country, and he's going to have to set up an agreement with homeowners and you want to be in the know, and we put this book together so you could raise the information bar so you wouldn't be under so much stress if you had a disaster.
And you said this has checklists that the homeowner can
There's
go
a
through?
number of checklists in there. There's some very graphic discussion in there about what happens during a house fire and how lethal they are and how quickly they can act. And it's been used by a number of different people in the country. We're going to make it available online through www.thehouseholdfire.com. We want to make this plentiful so people under this enormous stress have some guidance from an outside objective point of view. We're trying to make this available to women who are in single-parent households that are making the construction decisions in the country, they're making the risk management decisions, and they're making the safety decisions. And this is a sit-down with somebody who's got an objective point of view.
I think it's wonderful that this resource is there. And that FEMA, I think it's certainly to your credit that FEMA has it on its reading list.
Yeah.
You brought some pictures, and we're going to try to show as many of them as we can, as we kind of are running out of time. Phil, if you'll put the pictures up, we'll get Paul to tell us what they are.
This is a very short-term kitchen fire. As you can see, the smoke line was up close to the ceiling very quickly. If you flip to the next one, you'll see probably the source area. And this whole area, this only takes a few seconds to start generating this much smoke. And it melted into the refrigerator because the rubber in the refrigerator starts melting at about 400 or 500 degrees. As you can see, the area around the rest of the kitchen started to develop and hold all that smoke. Now remember, those temperatures are probably in the 400 to 500 degree range very quickly. And if you're in that environment, it becomes very hazardous. You need to know your path out. And that smoke did not take long.
Oh, that's terrible.
Here's another set of framing that's failed. Light construction in America today, as you can see, it doesn't take a whole lot. Drywall is very protective material, but it doesn't give you much time. And in these environments, you have these clouds of fuel gases and contaminants. In those gases are actually material, carbon monoxide and cyanides, and a very nasty mix of those under pressure because of an expanding fire. And here's another layer of smoke. Rock removal and smoke becomes very difficult. There's a certain family of cleaners, and sometimes you have to sandblast. But if you notice how that wind blew, it took out that whole end of that because of these expanding gases and how quickly these houses become pressurized because of normal fuel. Average house in America now is stockpiling 3.5 tons of solid fuel.
Oh my goodness.
That's from the moving industry. Here's another set of kitchen environment situations. That doesn't take long. That just takes a matter of a few minutes to turn that whole area that dark. Now that actually is a light fire.
I can't imagine.
This is the other end of the house. That's just smoke residue from the opposite end of the house.
I see the footprints on the floor,
Yeah,
on the carpet.
that film goes everywhere. And if you had a busy day at work and you came home to this, you would not want to find out that somebody had left a curling iron on in a bedroom. This is another category. Basement fires usually handle a lot of HVAC equipment. If you have HVAC operating during fire conditions, maybe not specifically in this case, but you're causing a lot of turbulence that goes along with the fire. That is about 500-600 degrees when you start melting all that metal.
I can't even tell what some of that is.
There's a refrigerator and there's some cabinets, and of course there's a lot of storage material in that basement. But a lot of fires cook at slow temperatures and circulate a lot of smoke before they get enough air to start gaining speed and getting high temperatures. As you can see, that basement is going to require an enormous amount of work and probably 3 or 4 months worth of labor.
While we're looking at these pictures, you were on HGTV's This Old House program. Would you want to tell us about that while Phil just runs the pictures?
That was an interesting show. We started out with a fire in an old house. We thought fairly typical. Then we found out very quickly that there was a lot of water damage, and it was actually from 3 different sources, and it ended up being a separate set of costs to the owner that weren't part of the fire.
Oh my goodness.
We had a roof leak that was old, that was exposed because we were doing demolition. We had water migration through the foundation and crawl space, and it was causing rot in the floor system. And then we actually had a plumbing leak. So we had 3 different water losses.
We only have 1 more minute, believe it or not. Paul, I thank you so much for being on this show and for bringing this information to my audience. I just think that we can't be too careful. My husband, I drive him crazy because I go around checking everything 4 and 5 times before we leave the house, but I think it's certainly the thing I should be doing, especially talking to you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. We can save a life.
Thank you so much again.
Right.
I hope you all have enjoyed tonight's show and have a better understanding of how to proceed if you do have a house fire and what steps you can take to try to prevent one. My next show will feature the role of nurse practitioners in today's medical environment. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.